Investigators learned that airport sensors registered some downdrafts.
We made sure to give them updates. Like I said, it was rough.
So they knew what they were flying into?
Yes.
Given the weather conditions at the time and the unstable air, investigators were able to determine that there may have been downdrafts up to 300 or 400 feet per minute occurring at the time of this event.
So if there was a downdraft, these guys would have been prepared for it?
Oh, yes.
It was possible that wind shear could have pulled the aircraft down into the trees, but a careful look at the weather at the time, after that, we determined that simply wasn't true.
Was there anything else out of the ordinary that night, besides the weather?
Well, the tower was shut down for repairs at the time. A leaky window. One of our supervisors went up to make sure they landed okay.
You mean the tower was down during their approach?
Yes.
I'd like to speak to the supervisor who was in the tower.
Sure, of course.
Did Flight 1572 slam into trees due to a lack of guidance from the tower?
Air traffic control work is demanding, and it's a precise job. If there are any major disruptions, either in the tower or on a radar scope, it could affect aircraft traffic greatly.
Were there any signs the crew was having trouble during approach?
Not really. It was all normal until they called in the emergency.
Take me through what happened.
They were already 6 miles out, lined up with the runway. The runway looked clear, so I told them they could land.
We are 6 miles from runway 15.
Landing is at your discretion. The runway does appear to be clear.
Copy.
Did you give them an actual clearance for landing?
The tower was closed. I can only give advisories. It's up to them to decide after that if they want to land.
Advisories are just information provided to the pilot for their own use. They can listen to it, they cannot listen to it, it's up to them. In this case, the tower was not open, so therefore he didn't have authority to issue a landing clearance.
Investigators still don't know if poor weather and a closed control tower caused the pilots to drop below the minimum descent altitude and into the trees.
This April on National Geographic Network. Massive machines require engineering extremes.
These are the most powerful devices ever produced by mankind.
We strip down these big ideas to reveal the makings of the world's greatest mechanical marvels. Cargo ships move the world, but they are also gargantuan polluters. We go beyond the vessel to meet with the pioneers hoping to turn the tide.
We use renewable energy and hydrogen. These solutions are available for a clean future.
Join our very own explorer, Albert Lynn, as he traverses the globe to map out the ancient civilization.
Something incredible happened here about 800 years ago.
All week long, see wildlife at its most brutal as we bring you up close to some of the most lethal predators on the planet. All new this April on National Geographic Network.
Can traveling make you happier? We think so. Every weekend, make memories all over the world with Nat Geo Travel.
Wow, what an experience! This explosion of flavor.
I am so excited. So, are you coming with us? Your bucket list of adventure starts here. Nat Geo Travel, every Saturday and Sunday at 4:10 p.m. on National Geographic.
When I was 2 or 3 years old, my grandmother used to tell me fantastic stories about penguins. The first time I visited a penguin colony, I really felt that this is the mission of my life. Excellent. There you go. 3.8 kilograms. What is happening now is that we are posing a lot of threats to the wildlife. We need to inspire change. When we work in conservation, we don't work for ourselves. We work to protect the wildlife. It belongs to all of us. I am Pablo Garcia Borboroglu. I am a penguin researcher and conservationist.
life. I'll do it till I'm laid in the casket.
As a journalist, if I'm trying to get into these clubs and see how they operate.
People want to kill you for asking questions.
I kept hearing about girls dying. Is something going to happen to me next?
Everybody involved is making money.
The black market will be here as long as the legal market keeps screwing up.
Let's start it at 12:53 when the crew contacts the tower.
Investigators turn to the cockpit voice recording of Flight 1572's final approach to determine why the plane dropped too low and flew into trees.
Landing is at your discretion. The runway does appear to be clear.
And what are you showing right now for winds?
170 at 24. Copy.
He's checking the runway, giving them weather updates. Solid job so far.
The team listens to the supervisor giving the crew guidance to help them land.
It was a good initiative for him to do that. It was something some people would not have done based on the fact that the tower itself was a bit of a precarious area.
Flaps 40.
Flaps and slats to 40-40. You are clear to land.
Okay. Give me 1,000 down.
1,000 down. You got it.
Stop that. 1,000 feet a minute? No way.
As they neared the ground, the crew decided to make their final descent at 1,000 feet per minute, nearly double what is normal.
That, in my mind, is quite excessive. You didn't have to descend that steeply.
Especially on a non-precision approach, where you have a minimum descent altitude that you should not be going below. The faster you're descending, the earlier you have to start leveling off, or else you end up going below the target altitude by the time you correct and come back up again.
According to the descent profile, they're 5 miles from the airport at 1,900 feet.
Using the radar beacon data from air traffic control, investigators track Flight 1572's cockpit conversation throughout the descent.
At 1,000 feet per minute, they're below their MDA in less than a minute.
Sure, that's fast, but the first officer should be calling out the altitudes.
While the aircraft is descending, the pilot is supposed to monitor the airplane's MDA, minimum descent altitude.
The first officer should call it 1,000 above the MDA to the captain, and then 100 foot to the MDA, and then the MDA altitude.
Okay. Let's listen to the first officer's call-outs.
There's 1,000 feet.
Good. He made a 1,000-foot call out.
But they don't hear any more call-outs after that.
The first officer called out the 1,000 foot above the MDA. He did not call out the 100 foot above the MDA.
Investigators then hear something unusual.
1,080 is your right. You're going below your
Hang on. Was that the minimum descent altitude call-out?
I think it was supposed to be.
The team discovers that the first officer mishandled the remaining call-outs.
The first officer started to call out for the MDA, but never finished his sentence.
So he makes half a call at their minimums.
And then doesn't say anything else until they're below it.
And by then they've hit the trees.
Why did the pilots make such a critical error so close to landing?
Let's talk to the pilots.
In this particular case, we were very fortunate to have a live crew to interview. We wanted to determine exactly what they were thinking about during the accident.
Walk me through your actions. 4 miles from the airport as you approached minimum descent altitude.
Look, the weather was rough. We were 2 hours late departing. I was monitoring the instruments. The 1,080 is your right.
Okay, and then what?
As we got closer to the minimum descent altitude, I looked outside for the airport. And when I looked back, we were below minimums. You're going below your...
During that time he was looking out, he was not monitoring the flight gauges as closely as he should have been. In this case, the appropriate procedure would have had the first officer glued to the altimeter and the compass and other instruments in the cockpit until the captain said, "I see the runway."
Why didn't you call for a go-around?
Well, there was no time. We immediately hit the trees.
What the?
It was a stressful night.
There could be a bit of task saturation in there. This went from an easy, kind of relaxed flight with a little bit of weather difficulty to, oh my gosh, everything's going wrong really, really fast.
Something doesn't add up. The first officer couldn't have been at his minimum seconds before hitting the trees.
Maybe there was an issue with the altimeter settings.
Pilots must calibrate the altimeters based on outside air pressure, which can change dramatically in extreme weather conditions. Pilots frequently recalibrate the altimeters to maintain an accurate altitude reading.
Altimeter setting is very important. You can't do an approach in bad weather unless you know what the altitude of your airplane is.
Let's see what settings they used.
It's a lot of rain. I can see that.
In this case, because of this storm that was going through that area, the pressure was falling rapidly. And when that happens, your altimeter setting goes down quickly. It means if you don't reset your altitude, then your airplane is flying lower than you think it is.
Here. The dispatcher updated them with an altimeter setting of 29.23.
NTSB investigators check whether the pilots of American Airlines Flight 1572 properly set the altimeter during the stormy approach into Bradley Airport.
What time was that?
12:30 a.m.
That was 25 minutes before they hit the trees.
And with the changing weather conditions, they must have received an update from Bradley ATC.
Well, one thing that the crew considers and expects from the tower, our air traffic, is the update of the weather as quick as possible so they can also amend what they need to do.
Okay, they first contacted approach control at 12:43.
Bradley approach, American 1572. We are at 11,000 feet.
Investigators expect the approach controller to give the crew a weather update, including the altimeter pressure setting.
The approach control issue the altimeter setting on initial contact when an arriving aircraft enters their airspace. The altimeter is displayed as a digital display in the control tower as well.
American 1572, Bradley approach, roger. Expect VOR runway 15 approach.
But the update is never provided.
Approach did not update their altimeter setting, even though the pressure was dropping rapidly.
There's nothing at all from approach right up until he passes them off to the tower.
Why wouldn't the approach controller give them a weather update?
Good question. Let's ask him.
One thing that puzzled investigators was why the air traffic controllers in the Bradley Tower didn't keep the pilots updated with the current altimeter setting.
You mentioned before that the weather was quite active that night.
Yes, it was changing quickly all night.
What was the airport's altimeter setting at the time of the accident?
Let me see. 29.15.
Investigators learned that the altimeter pressure setting at the time of the accident was not the setting the pilots were originally given.
Why didn't the crew receive an updated setting?
29.15. I didn't think to give it to them.
Sometimes things that you do over and over and over again become too routine, And late at night, when there's not a whole lot going on, sometimes those are the things that drop through the cracks.
We wondered about that excuse a little bit, but it's what he said. So in essence, the pilots did not have the current altimeter setting when they flew the approach.
We got the altimeter setting from the time of the accident.
Comparing the two altimeter settings will reveal how much lower the plane was flying than it should have been.
0.08.
The difference in the altimeter setting from what they had put on their instruments to what the reality was about 0.08 inches of mercury, which equates to 76 feet.
Because of the pilot's outdated setting, they thought they were 76 feet higher than they actually were.
The discovery is eye-opening.
Once you get close to the ground, 76 feet is a big deal. Once you're coming across the minimum descent altitude and you're keeping the airplane level at the minimum descent altitude, 76 feet is critical.
The question is, would they have hit anything had they been 76 feet higher?
Well, we know they struck the trees at an altitude of 771 feet. Add 76 feet to that.
They wouldn't have hit anything.
No impact.
If they had the correct altimeter setting, even though they went below the MDA, they still would have been 76 feet higher. And we probably wouldn't be talking about this right now because they would have missed the trees.
But that doesn't explain why they were 309 feet below their minimum descent altitude. 76 feet of that are on ATC. The other 233 feet are pilot error.
This was out of the control of the pilots to a certain extent, but going below the MDA should have been caught by both the first officer and the captain. This is what created the accident.
In the end, it came down to the crew's decision.
Investigators now understand what happened to Flight 1572.
The outdated altimeter setting and the rough weather meant that the crew had almost no room for error on the approach.
And when they were descending too fast and past their minimum descent altitude, there was no way they could recover before hitting the trees.
Only one question remains unanswered.
In spite of hitting the trees, how did they make that landing?
Coming up next, what excites these adventure seekers?
It's so close.
What makes their blood rush?
Woo! Look at that mouth.
Why are they so fearless?
There's thousands of bees.
How far will they push their limits?
There's only one way to find out for sure. That's to get in the water.
Nat Geo Adventure, coming up next on National Geographic.
Our biggest rival has been Mother Nature.
Let's get in before the storm. Forward, forward, forward.
Oh my God. This is what I live for.
I'm going to will it to the finish line.
Yes, yes. We're going to find out who the real king of the South is.
Wicked Tuna, North versus South, Sunday nights at 9. New to National Geographic.
You guys ready? All right, guys, let's go, let's go!
At Zoo Tampa, our commitment is to each the 1,100 individual animals in our care.
Love their little faces. We'll do anything for them. We're really lucky to be here. This is why we do what we do.
Secrets of the Zoo Tampa, Sunday nights at 8:30. New to National Geographic Wild. This April on National Geographic Network. Massive machines require engineering extremes.
These are the most powerful devices ever produced by mankind.
We strip down these big ideas to reveal the makings of the world's greatest mechanical marvels. Cargo ships move the world, but they are also gargantuan polluters. We go beyond the vessel to meet with the pioneers hoping to turn the tide.
We use renewable energy and hydrogen. These solutions are available for a clean future.
Join our very own explorer Albert Lynn as he traverses the globe to map out the ancient civilization.
Something incredible happened here about 800 years ago.
All week long, see wildlife at its most brutal as we bring you up close to some of the most lethal predators on the planet. All new this April on National Geographic Network. Machines are getting bigger and better with each engineering innovation. Find out what really goes on under the hood of some of the world's greatest mechanical marvels. Colossal Machines. Monday nights at 9. New to National Geographic.
Here's the FDR readout.
NTSB investigators turn to Flight 1572's flight data recorder to learn how the crew managed to recover their jet after they struck the trees.
So, they hit the trees, and they immediately pull the flaps back to 15 and go to max thrust.
The data shows that the crew quickly configured the plane for a go-around.
Go around. Going around. Flaps 15. Positive rate. Gear up. Gear up.
Then, just as they begin their go-around, they lose their left engine.
The aircraft actually ingested trees, the tops of the trees, into the engines.
Left motor's failed.
Followed by their right engine.
Here you have a scenario where something devastating just happened. We just plowed through some trees on the top of a ridge 2.5 miles away from the runway and losing capabilities on this aircraft by the second.
They've got the nose way up, they're losing speed, and both their engines are gone.
That's a recipe for a stall if I've ever seen one.
All of a sudden, they were starting to lose airspeed. They were in a nose-high attitude, and that's the worst time that can happen.
Airspeed is what makes the airplane fly. If there isn't enough air moving over the wings stop flying. And that is what's referred to as a stall.
There's the runway straight ahead.
Fortunately, the first officer saw the runway. They had to get the airplane on the ground in a hurry because they would not be able to keep on flying it with the engine power they had.
Okay. Tell them we're going down. Tell them emergency.
So now he's got to reconfigure the aircraft again. And remember, this is all happening in seconds. He's got to focus on trying to save whatever altitude and airspeed he has left to make it across the fence and to the runway environment. This is a critical stage of flight now because he doesn't have power. All he can do is trade altitude for airspeed.
Now we know their flaps were all the way down at 40.
Flaps 40. All the way down. They're all the way down.
He's got to generate something else that's going to get him across the fence. And that's when he drops 40 degrees flaps.
The drag from the flaps slows them down, but for the first few seconds, it balloons them up.
40 degrees of flaps change the curve of the wing, which increases the lift of the wing, and gives him that extra little bounce to get a little bit further.
If he had not have done that, or if he would have delayed it a little bit, the accident could have been totally catastrophic.
You got it, dude. You're gonna make it.
They glide down to the runway.
Unfortunately, they didn't have quite enough airspeed and altitude, so they landed early, kind of scooted and flopped onto the pavement of the runway. They made mistakes going into the tree strike, if you will, and yet did a brilliant job landing the aircraft.
That's an incredible show of airmanship.
The crew's actually excellent cockpit resource management in the very difficult situation that occurred after they hit the ridgeline. They cooperated, they didn't panic.
The way these two pilots worked together was remarkable. And one of the last things that's on the tape that kind of really gives you a chill is after they make the runway, the first officer says,
God bless you. You made it.
This is an accident that probably is not well known to a lot of people. And that's because the aircraft was able to end up on a runway and nobody was killed.
The captain's impressive recovery doesn't make up for the crew's errors. The NTSB's final report concludes that the probable cause of this accident was the crew flying below the minimum descent altitude before they could see the runway.
We think, in essence, the main factor involved in the accident was the fact that the pilots did not monitor the altitudes they were flying through correctly. They should have leveled off at a point, and they simply did not do so.
Following the accident, American Airlines increased the MDA requirement by 100 feet and visibility requirement by half a mile for non-precision approaches to Bradley Airport.
A lot of rain.
The NTSB also recommends that in conditions where pressure is falling rapidly, controllers should issue altimeter setting updates as frequently as possible.
The approach controller issues the current altimeter setting. That didn't happen either, right? What's important to understand, though, in terms of responsibility, is that the captain is the final authority on the flight. It's ultimately the captain's responsibility to ensure the safety of the flight. In this case, he did not ensure that he had the most current altimeter setting.
This accident was important to me because it was one of the few where nobody was killed, nobody was hurt, and yet the safety board came up with some pretty good recommendations to mitigate some of the factors that existed.
The clock is ticking.